Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this third episode of what is season 3 of Raising the Roof. I'm Nick Atkin, and you're listening to the podcast that brings together business leaders as well as industry experts to unpick the hot topics in both housing and beyond. Season 3, as you probably are aware if you're a regular subscriber, is already in full swing. And so I want to kick off this episode with a question for us all to think about. That question is, what does it mean to be truly happy? It's something we've all asked ourselves in our lives at some point, and a subject we're going to take into a deep dive today. And that's because who better to help us answer that question than Henry Stewart? Henry's got the best job title of anybody I know. He's a Chief Happiness Officer. Henry's got a multi-award winning company, which is called Happy. And it's all about helping organisations to create truly great workplaces. And he's won widespread recognition for what is a really, truly innovative approach to both management and also customer service. He started his company in his back room in London a number of years ago. I won't say how many, but he's now got a whole host of major clients, including the British Library, Barclay Homes, and the Clinical Leaders Network, amongst hundreds and literally hundreds of other organisations. Henry also has a special connection to God's own country of Yorkshire. In fact, he grew up in my hometown of Doncaster, and we literally lived in the street next to each other. So thanks for joining me today, Henry, and welcome to Raising the Roof. Before we get into it, can we give our listeners a quick overview of who Happy are and what is it you do, Henry?
Okay, we're a training provider. We have 3 departments. We have IT training, mainly based in Excel. We have leadership and management, which we have a 4-day flagship course spread over 3 months, which is based on happy workplaces. And we have apprenticeships, and that's level 3 new managers, level 5 experienced managers, and level 7 senior leaders. And with the apprenticeships, you can have a 2-year program of senior leaders for just £700 because it's 95% funded by the government.
Wow, 2 years for £700, you said?
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, as Yorkshire folk, Henry, we love a bargain, don't we? And that
Indeed.
sounds like a bargain. So we'll be signing up straight after this. Believe me, you didn't share that with me before we came on air. That's a great overview, and I'm really keen to understand what does happiness mean to you, and how do you recognise it in others who are around you?
Well, that is an interesting question because happy is very subjective. It's different for introverts. It's different for extroverts. When managers ask me, how can I make people happy? I simply say to them, well, ask them.
And what do you see in the difference in terms of happiness? Because certainly extroverts, you know, you can see that, or they may just masking if they're unhappy. But introverts can be quite tricky to sort of read the body language and the signs. So anything that's obvious, anything we can keep an eye out for?
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, what we have at Happy is we get people to say what percentage of their work they find joy in. And originally we thought we were pitching at 80%. And we actually asked people about it. They originally were at 74%. We're now at 86%. So people find joy in their work 86% of the time.
Wow. And you were saying the benchmark was 80%, is that right?
The benchmark was 80%, yeah.
Wow, right, okay. We've just finished our colleague engagement survey. So we're looking at the questions for next year. So that's already one that I think we're going to be adding in. So thanks for that. You know, certainly as leaders in organisations, and certainly post-pandemic, there's been a real focus and shift on creating a really positive workplace. Yeah. And absolutely key to that is people being happy in what they do. And you've worked with a lot of organisations. How do we create happy workplaces? You know, is there some secret formula? Is there a certain approach that people need to adopt? You know, what would be your advice for leaders who are listening to this and thinking, I want to create a really happy, positive vibe in my business? What sort of things should they be doing, Henry?
I'd give them 3 tips. First of all, get people to play to their strengths. Now, Gallup did a survey of over 1 million people asking, do you get to do what you are best at every day at work? Guess what percentage said yes to that?
With that sample size, I'd say you'd be struggling to get above 40%.
It was actually 17%. Just
Wow.
1 in 6 get to do what they're best at every day. But Gallup also found that they are more productive, 30 to 40% more productive when they do get to do what they're best at. So that's number one, get people to play to their strengths. So we have a job description when we recruit, but then we throw it away and work out what their actual talents are. So number two, give people trust and freedom to make their own decisions, so that you don't have levels of approval, you don't have things like that. You have freedom within guidelines. Yeah. And number three, instead of getting managers to tell people what to do, get them to coach, get them to build confidence, ask questions, and help people find their own solutions. So those 3 tips, I think, the things that get to a happier workplace.
That is really interesting. And I know you've sort of talked about some of the sample sizes that you've done, but what does a happy workplace look like? So you've given those tips for leaders, and they may be thinking, well, my workplace is happy or my business is happy. But what does a happy workplace look like? I know in your book, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but you reference examples from some of the big names. So you've researched Netflix, Google, Nando's. What's the best example of happiness in the workplace that you've come across?
Well, we've got a lot of clients that are, well, after we provided them with their training, that are happy. We've got TLC across the Pennines in Manchester, who they very much are based on strengths, on trust and freedom, and on coaching. We've got a company called Ashbury Labe. We've got all sorts of people. I've got a podcast, the Happy Manifesto podcast. And last week, there was someone from Static in Belgium on that. And what they do is they make happiness the key metric.
Right.
Rather than financial metrics, they make happiness the key metric. And that was also the case in John Lewis. When Speed and Lewis set up John Lewis in the 1920s, he said that every decision should be based on how happy it makes the staff.
Okay, I get that, but I suppose the counter to that is that, is it possible for colleagues to be happy all the time? Can we really make everyone in our workplaces happy? And is there also a bit here about the individual's responsibility as well?
Yes, there is. And, people can't really be happy all the time. I mean,
Are you happy all the time, Henry?
I am quite a lot, but I lost my mum and dad recently. My wife had breast cancer recently. So those are difficult times, right? Those are difficult times. But generally, I feel I am pretty happy. I have a positive outlook.
Again, that's really important in terms of that ability to look at things. Last year we spoke to Paul McGee, who you might have come across, just the sumo, and he talks about the fact that events happen, but it's your response to those events
Absolutely
that dictate the outcome. And I suppose, we've also spoken on this podcast quite a bit about resilience, and during those more challenging times, and, I've been where you are in terms of losing parents, and I know how difficult that is. Any things you can share in terms of how you get through those difficult times and get back to a much more positive outlook?
I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I just feel I am a very, quite a positive person. I mean, I think people can generally be happy. I think they, I mean, as I say, there are times when you are not so happy, but and that you can't be happy all the time, but you can have a positive outlook.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the difference. And certainly one of the things that made me happy recently, I have to say, was reading your book, a copy of which I've got here, the Happy Manifesto. It's an absolutely fantastic read. It's not very often I recommend books to people, but it was great, really easy, really accessible. But it also really resonates with a number of the things we've talked about on this podcast before, what some would term the future of work, or whatever badge you might want to put on it. But in the book, you talk about enabling people to work at their best and changing the way that managers manage. And I know before you spoke about the coaching style, but can you just unpack a little bit more of that, share some of that with people listening today, and particularly some of the business benefits that brings?
Well, it absolutely brings tremendous business benefits, because, I mean, there's been research on this. There's Alex Edmans did a piece of research based on the Best Place to Work Awards, and he looked at the stock market metric, and he found that over 25 years, this was in the US, if you'd been in the S&P stock market and you'd ended up with $100,000, if you'd have been in the Best Place to Work, you'd have ended up with $236,000.
Wow.
So if you've got a pension, make sure you put it into happy workplaces. And I do. And then there's the NHS. The King's Fund did a study of happy engaged hospitals. And you won't be surprised to know that where staff are more engaged, patients are more engaged. But you might not know that less patients die in happy engaged hospitals. For every 97 that died in a happy engaged hospital, 103 died in a disengaged hospital. And that's 5,000 deaths a year, or what I like to think, 5,000 lives saved by happy engaged hospitals.
Blimey. So if you're choosing your next hospital to have a procedure, you need to make sure it's a happy one.
Make sure it's a happy one, absolutely.
Right, okay. I'll definitely bear that in mind in future. And when I'm in the ambulance heading towards A&E, I'll be checking on the happiness score just before
Exactly.
they drop me off. Yeah. The other bit in your book I absolutely loved was the section on getting rid of the workplace rules, especially the comment about when Netflix got rid of their dress code. I think the comment was, and no one came to work naked. And also that, for travel expenses and other things like that, people were just encouraged to spend the business's money in the same way that they would their own. Now, obviously, being from Yorkshire, that certainly resonated with me, as I'm sure it did with you as well when doing the research. But I suppose just in terms of those workplace rules, it's hard for a number of managers to let go and to put that trust back in their colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give? How do you wean managers off that very command and control type approach and get them to move to more of a coaching style? What tips, tricks, advice would you give, particularly for senior leaders who want some of their operational managers to adopt more of that style?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that Netflix have changed their travel policy, because they found that when people did it as they would their own, they might actually spend quite a lot. So now it is act in Netflix's best interest, which is just, a 5-word policy, whereas you might in many companies you'd have lots of policies. Some managers are able to coach, some aren't. You may know that there are some managers in some organizations who aren't very good at managing people. CMI did a survey of employees and found that 49% would take a pay cut to have a different manager.
Wow, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because one of the things that makes people unhappy is often their manager. What we like to do with our clients is let people choose their manager.
Oh, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Would you do that at Yorkshire?
I'll tell you what, I'm always up for trying something new.
Because if a manager is a coach rather than telling people what to do, then they can choose any manager.
Yeah, I like that. That's a takeaway I may well be speaking to my colleagues with straight after this recording. So yeah. Can I also share with you that I have to confess, I did a little dance when I read the section on recruitment. It's probably the first time I've read anything where it's aligned with my own mantra, which has always been to recruit for attitude and train for skill.
Absolutely.
And for some people listening to this, that'll be a scary prospect. People like to score, they like the competency questions, and in a scenario, what would you do, and all that nonsense. For me, it's about how do you not just appoint the best actor on the day, but how do you actually find the right person who absolutely fits with the values and culture of your business. So any tips or just really sort of unpack really that statement that's in your book a little bit more to give some help and support in terms of making that shift, because that for many goes against what they've been hardwired to do over the last X number of years.
Yeah, well, we try not to ask people any questions in the interviews. So when we have trainers, when we recruit for trainers, we bring them in groups of 6. One of the key metrics that we have is being positive and supportive of others. Now, we don't want to ask people a question, when were you positive and supportive of somebody? We want to know that people are positive and supportive of their colleagues. So we will ensure that they are like that. Then we offer them training, and then we'll discuss what it was about that training that worked. And then they will train the colleagues for 10 minutes. And then in the second interview, we have them train for 5 minutes, and then we coach them so that we know that they will respond to changes. And that works really well. So the idea is to get people to do the job in the interview. Because when we did ask questions, when we asked somebody, what's great about being a trainer, they would say exactly the right thing. And then in the actual session, they would do something completely different.
Yeah, and I absolutely get that. I mean, that's the point for me of recruitment. Recruitment, you just cut through all that nonsense because you do just get the best actor. The other thing that I've found has helped is to have a picture of the perfect candidate before you start the process, so that you're clear what it is you're looking for in terms of the types of behaviours and the types of person. Because otherwise, you just end up recruiting the best of what might be a mediocre bunch on the day. I'm going to come to you now because I think you, as I said in the intro, you've just got the best job title of anyone I think we've had on this podcast, and what we're in season 3 now. So, Chief Happiness Officer. And I've got to say, how is your success measured in your workplace? Do you have targets? How do you know if you have actually achieved what your role is set out for?
Well, my aim is to create the framework to enable people to fulfill their work. So it's actually based around the employee engagement scores, if you have a metric. And I did, there was a survey a couple of years ago which said that we used to be the best for well-being, but other companies have caught us up.
Right.
So I then thought, what should I do now? And I decided to do the 4-day week. And I did a survey with people, and they were 16 to 1 in favour. I don't know who the one was, but and as a result of the 4-day week, we now have the best employee engagement of any day, of any time in 30 years.
Wow. Yeah, I think that you can definitely demonstrate you've achieved your job title there, Henry. I'll absolutely concede that. So we are approaching the bit of our podcast that I am always slightly nervous about. It's called Flip the Mic. So how this works, Henry, is that it's your turn to ask me a couple of questions that are relevant to what you do. So without further ado, and with a slight bit of nervousness, Flip the Mic, it's over to you.
So have you got a culture of trust and freedom at Yorkshire Housing where people can make their own decisions and aren't required to get approval?
There is a clear stated aim that's what we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Is it consistent throughout all 850 colleagues? Mm-hmm. Probably not, if I'm being honest. I think there are some people who still struggle with making that type of transition. Going back to what we said before about being hardwired, about how you behave at work, inverted commas. And I think that's in 2 parts. The first is some managers still manage rather than coach. So despite the support that we've given, I still think there's probably too much prescription, too much management, as opposed to actually coaching and supporting. And also, secondly, I think it's really hard for some people who have perhaps been very used to working in an environment where you're told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, to suddenly be set free. And sometimes though people need a lot more support to feel comfortable and confident to do that. So bit of a sort of patchy answer, but I suppose I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
That's not to say we haven't got a really, really strong ambition to not only recruit, but also retain the very best people if we're going to achieve our vision to be the UK's best housing provider. So if we're going to be the UK's best housing provider, we need to have the very best people, and very best people, as you quite rightly say, are those that are happy in what they do.
We can help you with that.
Absolutely. Don't worry. We're following up after this, believe me.
And what gives you joy at work?
I love being around people, but I particularly love being around positive people.
Yeah.
And not people who just say yes and all that, but actually just where you can have a really good sort of conversation and debate. And I love to be challenged. I love to have my thinking stretched by people. So I've made a really conscious decision to surround myself and to appoint people who I'm in awe of. Some of the people I work alongside are fantastic.
Yeah.
They are miles ahead of what I could ever achieve in terms of what they do. And I'd sometimes just step back and think, wow, it's just great to be part of this. And I think the other thing, it sounds a bit twee, but I do genuinely mean this. We've got 20,000 homes. We have about 50,000 people who live in those homes. And just sometimes just getting out and seeing the positive difference we're making to people's lives our best memories are made in our homes, and to see the difference that having a safe, secure, affordable home has for people, and hearing those real human interest stories, there's nothing better for me than that. I absolutely love it. So yeah, that's what gives me pleasure. So, Henry, it's the quick fire round because we are
Right.
nearly out of time. So, one or two sentences for each of these. First one, when in your very colourful career, which matches your colourful shirt today as well, but when have you been most fulfilled?
Now,
Excellent.
absolutely. In the early days of Happy, I would micromanage people. That was 36 years ago. But now, I make no decisions at Happy. If it's a whole company decision, everybody decides. So I just get to do what I love doing.
It's a great answer, but I am disappointed you didn't say my time when I lived in Doncaster. But we'll move on from that to the final question, which is, what's your top tip for people listening today for having a happy and fulfilled life?
Well, my happiness is based around work. So I would say very much give your people or have the trust and freedom to create your own decisions.
Excellent. You've heard it here, the secret to a happy and fulfilling life. So I can't believe it, but it's time to close the door on this episode of Raising the Roof. Thanks ever so much for listening today. A huge thank you, Henry, to you.
Thank
For
you.
joining us on this episode and bringing a flood, a tsunami of happiness and joy to the podcast. Just one final ask from me to those people listening. I hope you'll join me for another episode of Raising the Roof. To do that, you need to hit the subscribe button from wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening. See you soon.